Hello, and here we are on our second week of January. Actually, it's the third week of January, but it's our second week back. I'm still in a mess. Ceiling's been plastered, walls have had first coat of paint, so I'm sitting on at my living room table with virtually nothing else in here. It's and we're amongst dust sheets. we're amongst dust sheets and paint and brushes and various other things. So we're doing fine. The weather outside it's not raining at the moment, but it's been raining, and it's a little bit windy. I'm watching the windmills blowing in the pots outside, so that's fine. We did the first part of Daniel last week, and we're going to go on to the second part of Daniel this week. And Daniel's a really interesting book because the first half of Daniel, loads of people know, and most people know sections of it, quite a few sections. And the second part of Daniel is a bit of a mystery to most people. When we come to the second half of Daniel, we're in a totally different atmosphere. It's a totally different setting. Daniel 1 to 6 is very easy to understand, and Daniel 7 to 12 is very difficult, and lots of people just can't handle it at all. We move from the simple to the complicated, and we move from the third person, as in Daniel's talking about the third person in the first half of the book, to him talking about himself, and he's talking about him in the first person, and he's writing about himself and about the visions that he has of the future. He's switched for most of it being written in Aramaic to most of it being written in Hebrew. If you remember last time, the first chapter is written in Hebrew, and then the last couple are written in Aramaic. Well, this time it's reversed. The first chapter is written in Aramaic, and the remainder is written in Hebrew. And therefore we're moving into a section which is primarily for God's people, and that was an easy way to distinguish it, because Aramaic was a language that everybody used. It was a commonly used tongue, and Hebrew was just used by the Jews mainly. If you started teaching a non-believer about Daniel 7 to 12, they would think we're all loopy, because Daniel 7 to 12 is all prophecy. It's all about the coming times, and it's all in or a lot of it is in pictorial language. We move in from Daniel present life to his future insights, and he makes predictions that are so detailed, so dated in sequence, and so accurate in the light of historical events that it's simply history written before it happens. It's the most extraordinary example of this in the Bible, which gives us two implications. Firstly, the future is known by God. that he knows the future as well as the past, but he can't change the past. But the future is known to him, and he can change that. In Psalm 139, it says, he knows how many birthdays you have had and are going to have. And he knows what day you're going to die on, which is freaky, to say the least. He knows how long you're going to live from before you were born. Not only is the future known by God, but it's shaped by God. God sees our lives differently from us, as in we see our lives linear, whereas God, if that was life, and this is a light bulb, we look at life that way, whereas God looks down on life, and this is the beginning and this is the end, and this is the way that God sees time. He sees time from the beginning to the end, all in one fell swoop. This doesn't mean that everything is fated and planned. That's fatalism. There's a very delicate balance in the scriptures here. In Esther, Mordecai says to her, you can fulfill God's plan now, or if you don't, someone else will fulfill it for you. Judas wasn't predestined to betray Jesus. It was inevitable that somebody would, because Jesus said the Son of Man must be betrayed. But woe to that man by whom he is betrayed. You have to be careful to keep a balance between divine sovereignty and human responsibility. It's not that everything is predetermined, but God does foreknow things. And he does have the most free will out of anybody in creation. It's rather like a chess player. If you were playing a chess master, you have free will to make whatever moves you want. However, every move that you make, he can match, because he's seen the outcome of that move before you make it. The key is he's going to win. It's just about how many moves it takes. And in essence, that's the same with God. God's going to have his will played out, and if it's not you playing it out, then it'll be somebody else. So that's not fatalism, but there's a divine sovereignty that knows the future and can shape it. And whatever moves we make, God ensures that he will bring about whatever he wants to bring about. And that's what makes prophecy possible. Now we move into Daniel. Daniel chapters 7 to 12 in the book of Daniel are not continuous. They're not a string of visions that run in a straight line. They are separate visions of the future. They are not consecutive, which means that 8 doesn't follow 7 and 9 follow 8. They are all mixed up. Nor are they coterminous. Great word. They don't start at the same point and they don't end at the same point. We have to read each vision separately and then fit it in where it fits in. Now let's look at what they are. They do vary in duration. Some are about a short period of time in the future, and some are about a much longer period of time in the future. They vary in the amount of time they cover, so you can fit them all together easily. Daniel's visions do overlap, so some things that he sees are happening whilst other things are happening. They do cover 2 periods of time, which do end together. They cover the time before Christ's coming, and all the prophecies that are about prior to Christ's coming end when Christ comes. And they are also about the final days of history, and they all end when Christ comes a second time. Not that Daniel knew that Christ was coming a second time. So both cover the end times, but some cover the end times of the Old Testament and some cover the end times of the New Testament. The end of time before Christ's birth and the end of time after Christ's birth. So both are concerned, as I said, with end times. But he, being Daniel, didn't realise there was a gap in between them. It's like looking through a telescope and seeing 2 mountains like that. And if you see 2 mountains like that, they look like they're one mountain, but you can't see the gap in between, if you see what I mean. He didn't realise that there was a gap in between, just as Isaiah didn't realise there was a gap in between. He was looking at 2 peaks, but one was in front of the other, and he could see everything leading up to the first peak, but only the last set of things leading up to the second peak, and he couldn't see anything in the gap. His prophecies began 6 years after his death, and he can see right up to the first coming of Christ, and then nothing after the second coming of Christ until the very end. He called it the kingdom, but he didn't realize that the kingdom would come in 2 stages, because the king comes twice. We know this because we have hindsight. So we have the predictions of the events leading up to the first coming and the predictions leading up to the second coming. I wonder on times how the Jews put this all together, because this book effectively points at Jesus, and it points at the timeline when Jesus was coming, and yet the Jews don't think he's come yet. So how they correlate this, I have no idea, and I'll have to speak to a Jew to get them to give me some idea on it. Hi, John. So we have the predictions of the events leading up to the first coming of Christ and the second coming of Christ. And the astonishing thing is, both series of events are almost identical. You have a real bad guy appears in both periods. In the first, it's a guy called Antiochus Epiphanes, and in the second period, it's the Antichrist. And these 2 men are remarkably similar. So as we read the events leading up to the first coming of Christ, then we get an idea of the events which lead up to the second coming. The Jews don't like AD, Anno Domini, which means Year of Our Lord. So they use the letters CE, Common Era, and they use the letters BCE for before Christ, as in before the Common Era. So they take Christ out of the timeline. His first coming, Christ's first coming, split history in two. Hi, Kath. And his second coming ends history. Now we move on to Daniel's visions. And with Nebuchadnezzar's dream, which was in chapter 2 of Daniel, which was last week, that dream was about a monster which was split into sections, and it was basically saying that there would be a series of human kingdoms of decreasing quality. It started with Nebuchadnezzar, who's right at the top, and then it goes through the Medo-Persians and everybody else. These kingdoms would lead to the inauguration of the divine kingdom. We have the Babylonians, which is Nebuchadnezzar, then the Medo-Persians, then the Greeks and the Romans. And the king would come during the Roman Empire, which Jesus did. He expected the divine kingdom to take over from the human kingdoms. And this is sort of what Daniel was seeing. But because he was seeing two peaks of a mountain, he wasn't seeing the gap in between. And it looked like one continuous flow to him. So he didn't know that there would be a period when God's kingdom would share the earth with human kingdoms. He was seeing the second peak as part of the first peak. And we live in that gap. Hi, Kath. One day, there will be one kingdom. And that one kingdom will be God's kingdom. If we go back to the vision of the giant in King Nebuchadnezzar's dream, he saw a rock destroying the giant. And this rock was formless, and it wasn't hewn by mankind. And that rock was the divine kingdom, and it was basically, it came and destroyed the monster or the giant at the giant's feet. And Daniel thought that would happen all at once, but we know it's happening in two stages. Let's look at the predictions leading up to Christ's birth. Daniel even predicted how long it would be between when he made these predictions and when the king would come, to the year. First of all, the predictions in chapter 2, which is the first part of Daniel, the monster, the Babylonians. The Babylonians would be followed by the Medes and Persians, who would be followed by the Greeks, and then followed by the Romans. And this is all part of Daniel's vision and prophecy. And this all happened and came true exactly to the letter. In chapter 8, we have a ram and a goat, and the goat had one horn. And they correspond to, the ram corresponds to the Medo-Persian Empire, and the goat corresponds to the Greek Empire. And all these things that were said in chapter 8 about the ram and the goat have all come true. It talks about the Medo-Persian Empire, which is a massive empire. It stretched from India to Egypt and included the whole of Turkey. Everything that was said about that empire came true. The Greek Empire was ruled by Alexander the Great, who was commonly and not nicely known as the goat. He was actually 31 when he died, and he conquered basically the whole world. he died through excess. So he was an excessive man. But he charged around everywhere, butting everybody out of the way. He was like a charging ram, and that's what gave him the nickname of the goat. When Alexander the Great died, his empire was split between his 4 top generals. And here I try and say their names. Lysimachus got Turkey, Cassander got Greece, Ptolemy got Egypt, and Seleucus got basically the bit in the middle. So Israel was once again trapped between Seleucus and Ptolemy, and it was Egypt here and Seleucus's lands here, and Israel is trapped right in the middle. Chapter 11 is all about the kings of the north and the south, so that's all about Seleucus and Ptolemy. And they really became a pressure on little Israel. The Greek Empire divided into 4, and Daniel saw that, and he said the real problem for God's people would be between Seleucus and Ptolemy's empires. Chapter 9 contains this amazing prediction of how long it would be until the king returned. And Daniel said it would be 70 weeks. Well, 70 weeks doesn't sound realistic. But what Daniel was saying was a week was the same word for 7. And it was counted as years. So it was 70 times 7 years, which is 490. He said there was, he said from the decree to go back to Babylon, to Jerusalem, the king would be 483 years, which, and there was a period of 7 years to be added on. But which decree is he referring to? Because there were actually 4 decrees. The decree of Cyrus began the return in 536 AD. Darius made a decree allowing more to go back, and Artaxerxes made 2 decrees which enabled Nehemiah to go back and rebuild the temple. Whichever you count from, it either brings you to Christ's birth or Christ's baptism. Now, we have another problem. Was Daniel using the solar year, which is 365 and a quarter days, or was he using the lunar year, which is 360 days? And there's a lot of controversy around these things. And I'm no scholar, so I can't answer that definitively. The thing is, the fact is that just under 500 years after Daniel had made these predictions, Jesus was born. And the details of the astronomical problems are mind-boggling, but it's near enough. Either way, the king had come. And it's incredible to have said the 500 years previous that a king would come in 500 years' time. And this was divided into 7 times 7 years, which is 49 years. 62 times 7 years, which is 434 years, which makes up the 483. And why was this divided? Ooh. I just skipped forward loads, about a page and a half. Why was this divided? Because that was the exact time it took to rebuild Jerusalem. So the 7 times 7 years would cover the rebuilding of Jerusalem, and then the 62 times 7 years was until the king would come. And then you've got 1 times 7 years, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Chapter 10 of Daniel, Ayadari, talks about the fact that all earthly conflicts are matched by heavenly conflicts. And we're talking about conflicts between demonic forces that are behind earthly kingdoms and forces of God. Behind thank you very much, Terry. Behind every earthly power, there is a demonic prince, and there's a demon behind people who want to overthrow other countries, and they will be willing to destroy everything to keep their country and to gain more land. Syria is a point in question. How you can completely destroy your country just to keep it and kill loads and loads of your own people is beyond me. But demonic powers are destructive, and they don't care what they destroy, as long as they keep their power and gain more power. And we are told in chapter 10 about the Persian and the Greek prince, and how God sends Michael to overcome them and deal with them. This is spiritual warfare, and the demonic powers, the demonic angels behind all these battles, then transfer their battles to earth. Earthly battles are a reflection of heavenly battles that are going on at the time. And that's the unique insight that Daniel shows us in chapter 10. Daniel isn't involved in this battle. He's just an observer. And it's left entirely up to the angels. And Jesus didn't say, go out and find demons and bind them. He said, go into all the nations and make disciples of all nations. Too many Christians are making demonology their life's work, and it's not your life's work. Your life's work is to take the gospel to people. That's not what Christ instructed us to do. The focus needs to be on people. Jesus and his disciples never went out looking for demons, but when demons came to them, they dealt with it in the name of Christ. So we should do likewise. We shouldn't go out of our way looking for demons. And some people, hi Anthony, some people make demons their life work, and that's going away from what Jesus told us to do. And it's telling here that Daniel was just an observer. Daniel was shown that while Daniel was praying, there was a war going on. But God was dealing with it, and God was dealing with it with his angels, and Daniel was to get on with the job that Daniel had, and that's really telling. It's just an insight that we need to have, that there is this war going on constantly. The flashing you can see in the background is my telly. It's true we don't fight with flesh and blood, but we fight or wrestle with powers and principalities. But this means that they attack us first, and when they attack us, we deal with them. All the struggles we have down here are an overflow from the struggles that are going on in the heavenly places between the forces of light and darkness. Daniel was allowed to see that, but God told him, I'm dealing with it. Chapter 11, this is the most astonishing portion of the Bible in terms of predictions. In 35 verses, there are 135 major events predicted. It is about a tiny section of history, about just before the king comes the first time. And yet there are 135 predictions made about this period. Now, this was part of Daniel that confounds liberal scholars who say that this section of Daniel must have been written 400 years later and then basically put back into Daniel because effectively they doubt God, and they doubt that God knows all this. But God knows the beginning from the end. There is no other part of the Bible that there is such an incredible concentration of predictions about the future. In the Bible there are 735 predictions. Well, 135 of those predictions are in Daniel chapter 11, which is an astronomical slice of the pie. Chapter 12 is entirely about the events leading up to the second coming, and we'll touch on those after. In chapter 11, we see Antiochus Epiphanes, and it's talked about in chapter 11. He's talked about as the greatest scourge against the Jewish people before the king comes. He became the regent in the Seleucia part of the Greek Empire. He was guardian to the boy king, who he killed and usurped the throne. He was the worst tyrant of all. He determined to wipe out the Jewish religion, much the same as Hitler did. He desecrated the temple by sacrificing a pig on the altar. He filled the temple with the temple rooms with prostitutes, and he erected the image of Jupiter in the temple in Jerusalem. This was what caused the Maccabean revolt. Now, the book of the Maccabeans has been taken out of our Bibles, but it's still in the Catholic Bible. So if you want to read the story of the Maccabeans, get yourself a copy of the Catholic Bible. Basically, there are a number of books which weren't prophetic books, so they were left out of the Bible. But there are a number of books covering the 400-year period between Malachi and Matthew, and there are a number of books, the Maccabees being one of them. He is, in a sense, Antiochus Epiphanes is in a sense a parallel to the Antichrist, at the end of history. And you had Antiochus Epiphanes at the end of the first part of history, and the Antichrist at the end of the second part of history. You couldn't have had the Antichrist at the end of the first part of history because Christ hadn't come yet. So that's the difference. So let's have a look at the predictions that are not yet fulfilled. All the predictions that we've talked about so far have been fulfilled. Remember the uncut stone that was thrown at the monster or the giant in Nebuchadnezzar's dream? That hasn't happened yet. Jesus has been once, but he has not yet caused the kingdoms of the world to collapse and taken over the world. Chapter 7, this chapter contains extraordinary things. Some people try to line up chapter 2 with chapter 7, and they say the 4 strange creatures are the same as the 4 body parts in the giant in chapter 2. And here in chapter 7 we have a lion with wings, followed by a big bear, followed by a leopard with 4 heads, and a griffin or a dragon, followed by the kingdom of God. And a kingdom in which God's kingdom is established on earth by a figure like the Son of Man coming on the clouds to reign with the saints of the Most High. Now, that certainly hasn't happened. Not that I've noticed anyway. We have here a lead into the second coming of Christ. The first 3 will still be around when the 4th appears. So the lion, the bear, and the leopard will all be around when the 4th, the dragon appears, and that puts it outside, I think, the realm of the prophecy in chapter 2. These 3 are world powers at the end of history, and this is conjecture. This is not in the Bible. This is just me. The lion with the wings, I think, could be the USA and the UK, combining the British lion with the wings of the eagle. The bear is most certainly Russia, and the leopard could be the Arab world or the Asian world, with 4 main powers. These 3 are still around right at the end, but will be replaced by the dragon as the overall ruler. Saddam Hussein held a festival before he died, and on the program for the festival he had a picture of Nebuchadnezzar and Saddam Hussein side by side, profile and profile, and Saddam Hussein was telling people, look at my profile and look at Nebuchadnezzar's profile. And Saddam Hussein started building Babylon. He started rebuilding Babylon. Admittedly, it wasn't as large as Babylon. The gate of Babylon was about half the size of the original gate, but he had undergone a rebuilding project of the city of Babylon. So that's really interesting. The final world powers give way to the Antichrist. And then we come to the 70th week, or the last 7 years, which is divided into 3.5 week period, or 3.5 year period. And even the book of Revelation picks up on this. 1,260 days, 42 months, 3.5 years. full of trouble. Daniel saw it all, and he saw the first coming and the second coming. And in chapter 12, he talks about the resurrection of the wicked and the resurrection of the righteous people. And the righteous people are shining like stars forever. It's the final climax. And when it all happens, we will all know. So at some point, we will all, if we're not alive, be resurrected back to life. And we will all know at that point that we were either on the right side or on the wrong side. And remember, if you're not for Christ, you're against him. Primarily, this book was written as an encouragement to God's people. And throughout these chapters, God's people are encouraged to stand firm, to do exploits, to bring understanding, to endure suffering, to be refined, to resist evil, and to find rest. 7 points. They're very interesting reasons for revealing the future. God hasn't told us the whole future. He's just given us snippets. But he's told us enough of the future to be able to do these things. We know enough about the future to stand firm. We know enough about the future to do exploits, to bring understanding to people, to endure suffering, to be refined, to resist evil, and to find rest. These are all things that we talk about as being important as a Christian. And these are the things that I think define a Christian. Some people want to know the future out of sheer curiosity. The essential reason for God revealing the future to us is for us to handle it properly, so that we can be ready, so that we can stand firm and do what God wants us to do. We can endure suffering knowing that the end will be glorious. The other reason is it's a warning to unbelievers, especially to those who want to build human empires, who want to be powerful people. Ultimately, the Son of Man will replace them all. We belong to the future King of the whole world. The Son of Man will come on clouds of glory and establish his kingdom of heaven on earth. And we shall reign with him. That's a great emphasis. There's a great emphasis on getting ready to reign. He's going to reign with the saints of the Most High. That's us. And we have to be ready to reign. So we have to put all of those things in place that Daniel talks about to reign. And I'll go over them again. We need to stand firm. We need to do exploits. Not just sit on our bums in pews, but do exploits. We need to bring understanding. We need to bring understanding to fellow Christians. We need to bring understanding to the world of what's coming and what's been. We need to endure suffering. And that's self-explanatory. We need to be refined. And being refined means coming closer and closer to God. It means reading his word. It means studying his word. It means getting closer to God, knowing what God is about, praying to him. Be refined. We need to resist evil. And that needs to be an ongoing and increasing thing. When we are young, we do lots of stupid things. But as we get older and we get more wise, supposed to get more wise, we should be resisting more and more and more evil as we get into our older days. And we need to find rest. Rest is really important, because in rest you find peace, and in peace you find God. So we need to be ready as saints of the Most High, and be ready and be responsible governors of the world with God. Amen. That's the end of the book of Daniel. Now, I'm not sure what I'm going to do next week. We've covered a huge chunk of the prophets, and we've covered the whole of the prophets now. So that in itself is a third of the Bible, and we've covered Paul. We've covered various parts of the Bible. So I'm gonna have a look to see what parts I covered in Sanctuary International Matrix, and what I've covered since we've been doing this on Sanctuary Wills. And you could talk about Batman. Batman would be awesome to talk about, but maybe on a different podcast. We'll maybe start at Genesis, but I'll have a look and see. I know I've covered the Torah up to halfway through Numbers in little snippets, but I may cover the Torah in talks on here, but we've still got a certain number of books in the Bible in the Old Testament to go through. So if you tune in next week, as and when, but I'm here 11 to 12 or 11 till whenever I finish on Wednesday afternoon, and poor Robin never gets a look in. That's true, very true, Anthony. Robin for King, yay! But we'll see what books I feel it's good to cover, because I covered Kings and Samuel and various other things in when I was doing Sanctuary International Matrix, and everything that I've covered, all the Sanctuary International stuff, all the stuff I've done on here is all on Sanctuary World's YouTube. It's not put in an order, so it's just reams and reams of videos of me, but it is on there. So if you want to dip into any parts of the prophets or what I've talked about over what's coming up for a year, which is scary, then please feel free to have a look. But I will be back next time at 11 o'clock next Wednesday. God bless you. Have a great day. And for those in the UK, enjoy your lockdown. Stay safe. Don't go anywhere, because we can't. And God bless you. Bye.